For 33 years, I was the polite guest in my own life, useful when bills needed paying, disposable when love was handed out. But as I watched my mother and brother rewrite history to exclude me from the funeral, I realized my father's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was an eviction. They thought they could finally scrub the outsider from the ledger, unaware that a 25-year-old trust was about to cost them everything they tried to steal. The gravel of the driveway crunched under my tires, a sound that had always signaled the end of a long journey, but today it sounded like a warning. I turned off the ignition and sat in the silence of the car, staring up at the sprawling colonial house where I had spent 20 years trying to be invisible. The black wreath on the front door was the only new addition. Everything else was perfectly preserved, manicured, and imposing. It was a house designed to impress strangers, not to comfort children. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired. My eyes were red-rimmed, not just from the 3-hour drive, but from the hollow ache in my chest that had settled there since the phone call yesterday morning. Dad was gone. The only person in this zip code who had ever looked at me and seen a daughter instead of a charity case was gone. I took a breath, grabbed my bag, and stepped out. The air smelled of rain and expensive mulch. I walked to the front door, my hand trembling as I reached for the knob. It was locked. It was never locked during the day when family was expected. I rang the doorbell. A full minute passed before the door swung open. My brother, Lucas, stood there. He was wearing a crisp navy suit, his hair perfectly gelled, looking like he was about to step into a board meeting rather than mourn his father. He was 35, 2 years older than me, and the biological son my parents had produced after they had already adopted me, the miracle baby who rendered the placeholder child obsolete. "Kennedy," he said. He didn't move to hug me. He didn't step aside immediately. He just stood in the frame, blocking the view of the foyer. "You made good time." I stared at him. The lack of emotion in his voice was chilling. I drove straight through. I said, "Is Mom inside?" "She is resting." "It has been a morning." He finally stepped back, allowing me to cross the threshold. The house smelled of lilies and lemon polish. It was cold, the thermostat set to a temperature that discouraged lingering. I walked into the living room, expecting to see signs of life, signs of grief. Instead, the room was pristine. The magazines were fanned out on the coffee table. The coasters were stacked. It looked like a showroom. Lucas closed the door behind me. The heavy click echoed. "We have a meeting with the funeral director at 2, he said, checking his watch. "Mom wants to get everything finalized today so we can move forward." Move forward. Dad had been dead for less than 30 hours. I nodded, feeling the familiar weight of my role in this family settling over me. I was the observer, the assistant, the guest. "I will go put my bag in my old room," I said. "Actually," Lucas said, his voice smooth, "we put your things in the guest suite downstairs. Mom turned your old room into a craft space last month. She needed the light." I froze. They hadn't told me. I had visited 2 months ago, and my room had been exactly as I left it. Now, barely a day after Dad died, I was officially being moved to the guest quarters. "That is fine," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Downstairs is fine." I walked past him, down the hall to the small bedroom off the kitchen that was usually reserved for my mother's bridge friends when they had too much wine. I set my bag on the bed and sat down. I waited for the tears to come, but they didn't. Instead, a cold knot of anxiety began to tighten in my stomach. I had come home to grieve my father, but the air in this house felt charged with something else. It felt like a strategy session was underway, and I was the problem to be solved. An hour later, I sat at the mahogany dining table. My mother, Deborah, sat at the head, looking frail but impeccably dressed in black silk. She was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief that looked dry. Lucas sat to her right with a notepad. I sat on the left, alone. The funeral director, a soft-spoken man named Mr. Abernathy, was laying out brochures. "We want the platinum service," Lucas said, cutting off Mr. Abernathy's explanation of the casket options. "Open casket for the wake, Clothes for the service. Very traditional. No surprises. Of course. Mister, Abernathy said. And regarding the speakers? Lucas glanced at Mom, then back at the director. I will give the eulogy. Mom isn't up to it. Obviously. I cleared my throat. I would like to say something. I said, just a few minutes. Dad and I were... Mom's hand slapped down on the table. It wasn't a hard slap, but the sound was sharp enough to silence the room. She looked at me, her eyes wide and wet. But underneath the tears was a steeliness I knew well. Kennedy, please, she whispered. Not now. I'm just saying I want to speak. I said gently, he was my father. He was everyone's father in a way. Lucas interjected, not looking up from his notepad. He was a pillar of the community. We need the service to be cohesive. We need to project strength. I looked at him. Project strength? This is a funeral. Lucas, it is about saying goodbye. Kennedy, Mom said, her voice trembling with that specific pitch she used to make me feel like a bull in a china shop. You know how you get. You get emotional. You ramble. People will be confused. We just want everything to be dignified. Confused? I asked. Confused by what? By his daughter crying? Lucas finally looked at me. His eyes were flat. It is just better if the family speaks with one voice. I have it covered. You can do a reading if you want. Something short. Scripture. I felt the blood rising in my cheeks. The phrase hung in the air. The family speaks with one voice. And I was not part of that voice. I was the disruption. I looked at Mr. Abernathy, hoping for an ally, but he was studiously examining his pen, knowing better than to step between a widow and her children. Fine, I said. I will do a reading. Good, Lucas said. He made a check mark on his pad. That is settled. As the meeting wore on, I noticed a pattern. Lucas was making decisions that involved significant amounts of money without even looking at Mom for approval. He authorized the most expensive catering, the highest-tier floral arrangements, and a reception at the country club. Do we need to check the accounts? I asked during a lull. I know Dad handled the finances. Do we have access to everything? Lucas stiffened. I have been handling Dad's affairs for the last 6 months. Kennedy, everything is under control. I didn't know that. I said. Dad never mentioned it. Dad was sick. Lucas said. He didn't want to worry you. You have your own life in the city. You're busy. He didn't want to burden you. There was that word again. Burden. The thing I had spent my entire life trying not to be. And the will? Mr. Abernathy asked gently. We will need the executor to sign off on the final burial permit. Lucas answered instantly. There is no will. The speed of the answer made me blink. No will? I asked. Dad was a businessman. He owned property. He had investments. There is no way he didn't have a will. He didn't, Lucas said, his voice rising just a fraction. He was superstitious. He thought writing it down was bad luck. It happens more than you think. Since there is no will, everything passes to Mom by default. It is called intestate succession. It is simple. He looked at me as he said it, his gaze daring me to contradict him. It is simple. It didn't feel simple. It felt rehearsed. After the meeting, the house fell into a heavy quiet. Mom went upstairs to nap. Lucas locked himself in Dad's home office. I stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door. The wood was dark oak, solid and impenetrable. I reached out and tried the handle. Locked. I frowned. Dad never locked this door. He used to leave it open so he could hear the baseball game on the TV in the living room while he worked. I looked closer at the handle. The brass was shiny, brighter than the surrounding plate. It was new. I walked into the kitchen, my heart beating a little faster. On the counter, Dad's cell phone was sitting on a charging dock. It was his old smartphone, the one he insisted on keeping because he hated learning new interfaces. I picked it up. I just wanted to see his last photos. Maybe he had taken a picture of the garden he loved, or the dog. I pressed the home button. The screen lit up. Welcome. Select your language. I stared at the glowing letters. The phone had been factory reset. Why would you wipe it? I whispered to the empty room. I put the phone back exactly as I found it. My hands were shaking. I needed something of his, just something small to anchor me, to prove that he had been real and that I had been his daughter. I walked to the living room cabinet where he kept his miscellaneous treasures. There was a drawer where he kept old watches, tie clips, and photographs that hadn't made it into albums. I opened it. It was empty. "What are you doing?" I spun around. Mom was standing at the bottom of the stairs. She wasn't napping. She was watching me. "I was just looking for a photo," I said. "Or maybe his old Timex, the one he wore when we went fishing." Mom walked over, her heels clicking on the hardwood. She closed the drawer I had left open. "We are cataloging everything," she said. "Lucas is making an inventory. We can't have things just disappearing." "Disappearing?" I asked. "Mom, it is me. I am not a thief. I just want a memento. It is not about you." "Kennedy," she sighed, looking exhausted by my very presence. "It is about the estate. Until we know the value of everything, nothing leaves the house. You know how Lucas gets about details. He wants it done right. Since when does Lucas care about Dad's old fishing watch? It is worth maybe $20. Please," she said, pressing a hand to her forehead. "Stop causing trouble. Your father hasn't even been buried yet, and you are already looking for payouts." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. "Payouts?" I took a step back. "I don't want money," I said, my voice shaking. "I want a picture of my father. It is all family property," she said firmly. "And right now, the family needs to protect its assets. Just let Lucas handle it. He knows what is best." She turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the middle of the living room, surrounded by things I wasn't allowed to touch, in a house where I wasn't allowed to speak. The wake was 2 days later. It was a suffocating affair. The funeral home was packed with Dad's business associates, golf buddies, and people who barely knew him but wanted to be seen. I stood near the back, wearing a black dress I had bought in the city. Mom and Lucas stood at the front, near the casket, receiving condolences like royalty. I watched them. They were a unit. Mom, small and tragic. Lucas, tall and protective. They looked like the perfect grieving family. I was the satellite orbiting their planet, close enough to be seen but too far away to matter. Occasionally, someone would recognize me. "Oh, Kennedy, look at you." They would say, "You look so much like, well, you look great." They always stopped themselves before saying I looked like my parents, because I didn't. I was tall, angular, and fair, while they were compact and dark-haired. The biological difference was always the elephant in the room, and tonight it felt like it was taking up all the air. I stepped out into the hallway to breathe. The smell of lilies was making me nauseous. "Kennedy?" I turned. A man was standing near the coat check. It was Mr. Henderson, one of Dad's oldest friends. He had been their lawyer years ago before he retired. But mostly I remembered him as the man who always brought me peppermint sticks when he visited. "Mr. Henderson," I said, managing a weak smile. "I am so glad you came." He looked older than I remembered. His suit hung a little loose on his frame. He glanced toward the viewing room where Lucas was holding court, then stepped closer to me. "I am sorry." "Kennedy," he said, "he was a good man. He loved you very much." I felt tears prick my eyes. "Thank you. It feels like nobody remembers that part today." He nodded, his expression serious. He reached into his jacket pocket. "I have something for you." He pulled out a plain white envelope. It was sealed. "What is this?" I asked. "A condolence card," he said loudly, "for the benefit of a woman walking past us." Then he dropped his voice to a whisper. "Don't open it here. Put it in your purse. Read it when you are alone." My heart skipped a beat. "Mr. Henderson? Just take it," he hissed. "And Kennedy? Be careful. Grief makes people do strange things, especially when there is money involved." Before I could ask him what he meant, he patted my shoulder and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of mourners. I went into the ladies' room and locked myself in a stall. My hands were trembling as I tore open the envelope. Inside, there was no card, just a single piece of yellow legal pad paper. Folded twice, I unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Dad's blocky, jagged scrawl. Safe deposit box, 404, First National, March 12, 1999. That was it. No message, no signature, just a location and a date. I stared at the date. March 12th, 1999. I did the math in my head. I was 8 years old. That was the year the adoption was finalized. I shoved the paper into my bra, terrified that Lucas might demand to search my purse. I flushed the toilet just to make noise and walked back out to the wake. I spent the rest of the night standing in the corner, watching my brother shake hands, wondering what exactly was in box 404 and why Mr. Henderson had looked so afraid. The next morning, the house was silent. Mom and Lucas were at the cemetery meeting the groundskeeper. I told them I had a migraine and stayed behind. As soon as their car pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my keys and drove to First National Bank. It was a small branch in the center of town, the kind with marble floors and tellers who knew everyone's name. I walked up to the counter. The teller was a young woman I didn't recognize. "Hi," I said, trying to sound casual. "I am Kennedy Price. My father, Robert Price, passed away this week." "Oh, I am so sorry for your loss," she said, her face softening. "Everyone in town is talking about it." "Thank you. I am trying to sort through some paperwork. I believe he had a safety deposit box here. Box 404. I need to check the contents." She nodded. "Of course. Let me just check the authorized access list." She typed on her keyboard. I held my breath. I watched her eyes scan the screen. She frowned. "I see the box," she said, "but I'm afraid I can't let you in." "Miss Price? Why not?" I asked. "Your name isn't on the current access list." She said, "The only authorized parties are Robert Price and Lucas Price." I felt a cold flush of humiliation. "Of course. Lucas, are you sure?" I asked. My father might have added me a long time ago. Maybe it fell off the system? She shook her head. "The list was updated 6 months ago. It is very specific." I gripped the counter. "Updated 6 months ago? By who?" "By your father. Presumably, it requires a signature." I stared at her. 6 months ago, Dad was on heavy medication. He was barely leaving the house. Lucas was handling everything. "Can I see the signature card?" I asked. "I can't show you that," she said. "It is against privacy regulations." "Please," I said, leaning in. "This is important. There is a date associated with this box. March 12th, 1999. Does that mean anything to you?" The teller paused. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She looked at the screen again, and her expression changed. It was a subtle shift, a widening of the eyes, a quick intake of breath. 1999? She asked. "Yes." I said, "Is there a note? A flag?" She looked at me, then looked around the lobby to see if her manager was watching. "Ms. Price," she said, her voice lower. "That box is flagged as a retention account. I can't tell you more than that. But if I were you, I would talk to the branch manager." "Can I talk to him now?" "He is in a meeting with your brother." She said. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Lucas is here? He came in the back entrance 10 minutes ago." I backed away from the counter. "Thank you," I whispered. I turned and walked out of the bank, my legs feeling like jelly. Lucas wasn't at the cemetery. He was here. He was ahead of me. He was always ahead of me. I drove to a coffee shop on the edge of town. Afraid to go back to the house, I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel. I felt foolish. I was chasing clues from a dead man while my brother was legally locking me out of my own life. Maybe Mom was right. Maybe I was just causing trouble. Maybe Dad really did trust Lucas more. Maybe the note was just the ramblings of a dying mind, passed on by an old man who didn't know the whole story. I was about to start the car and drive back to the city, to just give up and let them have it all. When my phone buzzed, it was a voicemail. I hadn't heard it ring. I looked at the number. It was blocked. I pressed play. The voice was distorted, but calm. It sounded like a man, but I couldn't place it. Kennedy, they know you went to the bank. They are going to try to run out the clock. They will present you with papers to sign after the funeral. They will tell you it is standard. They will tell you it is to release the house insurance. Do not sign anything, not a single page. Look closer at the records. Kennedy, look at what was sent to you, not what was kept from you. The line went dead. I replayed the message. Look at what was sent to you. I sat there for 20 minutes, my mind racing. What had Dad sent me? We barely emailed. He called once a week, but he hated typing. I opened my laptop, tethering it to my phone's hotspot. I logged into my email. I searched for Dad in the sender field. The results were sparse. A few birthday e-cards, a recipe for chili he wanted me to try, a forwarded joke from 3 years ago. I searched Robert Price. Nothing new. Then I remembered. He sometimes used his office scanner to send me documents when I needed them for taxes or student loans. The scanner's default name was Admin Scan. I searched Admin Scan. A list of emails popped up. Most were years old. Tax Forms 2015. Car title. But there was one from 8 months ago. The subject line was Household Records. I remembered this email. I had asked him for the deed to my car, which was still in his name, so I could transfer it. He had said he would scan the whole folder. I had opened it, found the car title, and ignored the rest. I opened the email. There was a single PDF attachment, scan_09_12_2024.pdf. I downloaded it and opened the file. It was 50 pages long. Receipts for roof repairs, the warranty for the furnace, the car title. I scrolled through, my eyes scanning the mundane details of a suburban life. And then, on page 42, the document changed. It was a photocopy of a document that looked much older than the others. The font was from a typewriter. The header read, Declaration of Trust. My heart hammered against my ribs. I read the first paragraph. This trust agreement, dated March 12, 1999, is made by and between Robert Price, grantor, and the next line was cut off. The page had been scanned crookedly. I scrolled down. For the primary benefit of the beneficiary defined herein. I looked for a name. I looked for Lucas. I looked for Mom. I found a clause halfway down the page. The purpose of this trust is to ensure the security and future of... The rest of the sentence was obscured by a coffee stain on the original paper. I scrolled to the bottom. There was a bold stamp. Do not discard. Original in vault. But the signature page was missing. The scan ended abruptly. I sat back, the laptop burning my legs. March 12th, 1999. The same date as the note from Mr. Henderson. The same date the teller reacted to. Lucas had said there was no will. He said everything went to Mom. But here was a trust created the year I was adopted, a trust that Lucas and Mom had never mentioned. I looked out the window at the sleepy town I grew up in. It looked the same as always. The brick storefronts, the oak trees, the diners. But suddenly, it felt like a stage set. They weren't just being mean. They weren't just grieving badly. They were hiding a legal reality that had existed for 25 years. I closed the laptop. The sadness was still there, heavy and suffocating. But something else was rising alongside it. A cold, sharp anger. They had wiped the phone. They had changed the locks. They had lied about the will. They'll try to run out the clock, the voice had said. I started the car. I wasn't going back to the city. I was going back to the house. I was going to sleep in the guest room, and I was going to eat their food, and I was going to smile at the funeral. I wasn't a guest anymore. I was a hunter, and I wasn't leaving until I found the rest of that document. The office of Sarah Jenkins was nothing like the mahogany-paneled sanctums my father used to frequent. It was located in a strip mall 2 towns over, sandwiched between a chiropractor and a dry cleaner. The carpet was industrial gray, and the coffee in the waiting room was burnt. But I wasn't here for ambiance. I was here because her reviews online said she was aggressive, affordable, and most importantly, completely unconnected to my family's social circle. I sat across from her, my hands folded tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking. I had laid out everything I knew: the locked house, the wiped phone, Lucas's insistence that there was no will, and the scanned document I had found in my email. Sarah Jenkins leaned back in her chair, studying the printout of the scanned trust header. She was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense bob cut. She tapped a pen against her chin. "So," she said, her voice dry, "your brother claims your father died intestate, meaning no will, no plan. Let the state sort it out." "Yes," I said. "He says everything goes to my mother by default, and he is handling the administration for her." Sarah let out a short, humorless laugh. She tossed the paper onto the desk. "Intestate is the oldest trick in the book for bullies," she said. "It sounds official. It sounds final. But let me tell you something, Kennedy. Men like your father, men who own businesses, who have safety deposit boxes, who keep records of roof repairs from 10 years ago, they do not die without a plan. They might die with a hidden plan or a complicated plan, but they don't die with no plan." She leaned forward, clasping her hands. "Here is the truth," she continued. "Even without a will, there are records. Assets like life insurance, retirement accounts, and trusts do not pass through probate. They bypass the will entirely. They go where the beneficiary forms say they go. If your brother is telling you there is nothing to discuss, he is lying. He is hoping you are too grief-stricken or too polite to ask for the paperwork." I felt a cold shiver go down my spine. I kept thinking I was paranoid. "I don't want to fight them," I said, my voice quiet. "I just want to know what my father wanted." Sarah looked at me with a softening expression, but her words remained sharp. "You are already in a fight, Kennedy. You just haven't thrown a punch yet. If that document you found is real, there is a trust. And if there is a trust, there is a trustee. And that trustee has a fiduciary duty to talk to you, not your brother." She slid a notepad across the desk. "Here is my advice," she said. "Stop calling them. Stop texting. Every time you speak to your mother or brother on the phone, they are mining you for information to see how much you know. They are using your emotions to manage you. From this moment on, you communicate in writing only, and you need to go back to that bank." "The bank?" I asked. "They turned me away." "You asked the wrong question," she said. "You asked to see the box. You need to ask for the trust department. You need to trigger a compliance check." I left her office an hour later, lighter in my wallet but heavier in my resolve. The world looked different now. It wasn't just a sad, confusing blur. It was a landscape of specific legal mechanisms, and I finally had a map. I drove straight to the First National branch. My stomach was twisting, but I replayed Sarah's words in my head. "You are not a daughter asking for permission. You are a potential beneficiary asking for compliance." The lobby was quiet. I avoided the teller line and walked straight to the glass-walled office in the corner. The nameplate on the door read, "James Paling, branch manager." I knocked and entered without waiting for a wave. "Mr.?" Paling looked up. Surprised. He was a man who wore suspenders and looked like he sweated easily. "Ms. Price?" he said, half rising. "I thought your brother was handling—" "I am not here about my brother." I cut in, my voice steady. "I am here regarding the trust established by Robert Price on March 12, 1999. "Mr. Paling froze. His eyes flicked to the door, then back to me. The friendly, small-town banker demeanor evaporated instantly. He sat back down slowly. "We don't have a record of a will," he said, his voice tight. "I didn't ask about a will," I said. "I asked about the trust. I have reason to believe this branch holds the original instrument in the vault, likely in Box 404. I am requesting the contact information for your institutional trust officer." He stared at me. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. He was weighing his loyalty to my brother against his fear of banking regulations. "Ms. Price," he said finally, his tone formal and cold. "We can't discuss trust matters at the branch level. I felt a surge of adrenaline. He hadn't said there is no trust. He had said we can't discuss it. That is fine. I said, then tell me who can. He scribbled a number on a sticky note and slid it across the desk without looking me in the eye. Sovereign Trust Fiduciary Services, he said. They handle the administration for our legacy accounts. You will have to take it up with them. I took the note. Thank you. Mr. Paling. I walked out of the bank with my knees shaking, but I didn't look back. A week passed. The days were a strange, suffocating limbo. I stayed in the guest room of my parents' house, avoiding my mother and brother as much as possible. We moved around each other like ghosts. Lucas was always on the phone in Dad's office, speaking in hushed tones. Mom spent her days arranging and rearranging the flowers that were still arriving, her face a mask of tragic martyrdom. I followed Sarah's advice. I stopped asking questions. I stopped trying to talk about Dad. I just waited. Then, on a Tuesday morning, the mail arrived. I was in the kitchen making coffee when the mail carrier knocked on the door. Mom was in the garden, and Lucas was gone. I answered it. The carrier held out a flat, rigid envelope. Sign here, please, he said. I looked at the return address. Sovereign Trust Fiduciary Services. My heart hammered. I signed my name. The envelope felt heavy, substantial. I took it to the guest room and locked the door. I sat on the edge of the bed and tore the tab. Inside was a thick packet of cream-colored paper. The cover letter was brief and direct. Dear Ms. Price, we are writing to you in your capacity as an interested party regarding the Robert J. Price Irrevocable Trust, dated March 12, 1999. Following the passing of the grantor, a mandatory compliance review has been triggered. You are hereby notified of a formal review meeting to be held at our offices on Friday, the 24th, at 10 in the morning. Attendance is required for the disclosure of beneficiary status. I read the words again. Beneficiary status. Not potential beneficiary, just beneficiary status. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 20 years. It was real. The scanning error. The note from Mr. Henderson. The voice on the phone. It was all real. My phone rang. The sudden noise made me jump. I looked at the screen. It was Mom. She was in the garden, 50 feet away. Why was she calling me? I answered. Hello? Kennedy! Her voice was a shriek, so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. What did you do? She screamed. What did you do? Mom, calm down. I said. What are you talking about? We just got a letter, she yelled. Lucas just called me from the office. He got a notice. A review meeting? For a trust? Why are you digging up things that don't belong to you? I felt the old reflex to apologize, to smooth things over, to be the good girl, but I looked at the letter in my lap, at the date that matched my adoption, and the reflex died. I didn't dig anything up. Mom, I said calmly, Dad set this up, 25 years ago. You are ruining everything, she sobbed, the anger instantly pivoting to hysteria. Your father hasn't even been dead 2 weeks and you are dragging us into legal nonsense. We are a family. Kennedy, why can't you just trust your brother? Why do you always have to be so difficult? The whiplash was dizzying. 1 second she was the aggressor. The next she was the victim. It was the pattern of my entire childhood. If I got good grades, I was showing off. If I struggled, I was ungrateful for their support. If I asked for nothing, I was distant. If I asked for something, I was greedy. Mom, I said, my voice shaking but firm. If Dad didn't want me to know about this, he wouldn't have named me. I am going to the meeting. You are selfish, she hissed, the tears vanishing as quickly as they had come. Just like your... She stopped herself. Just like my what? I asked. Just like my biological mother? Is that what you were going to say? She hung up. I sat there, listening to the silence. The line went dead, but the message was clear. I wasn't just fighting for an inheritance. I was fighting for the right to exist in this family's narrative. The next 2 days were a lesson in how quickly a reputation could be destroyed. I went to the grocery store to buy milk, and I ran into Mrs. Gable, the mother of one of my high school friends. She had always been kind to me. "Oh, Kennedy," she said, clutching her purse a little tighter. "I heard you are still in town." "Yes," I said, "just helping Mom out. That is, nice of you," she said, her eyes darting away. "Lucas mentioned you were having some financial trouble in the city. It is so hard for young people these days. I hope you get back on your feet." I stared at her. Financial trouble? I had a solid job as a graphic designer. I had savings. I had never asked anyone for money. "I am doing fine." "Mrs. Gable," I said. "Well," she said, backing away. "Grief makes people do desperate things. We are all praying for you." She hurried down the aisle as if I were contagious. It happened again at the gas station. An old neighbor looked at me with pity and asked if I needed a recommendation for a bankruptcy lawyer. Lucas, he was working the phones. He was planting the seeds. Kennedy is unstable. Kennedy is broke. Kennedy is coming after the money because she failed on her own. He was isolating me. He knew that if I made a fuss about the trust, everyone in town would view it through the lens he had crafted. The greedy. Failing adopted daughter, attacking the grieving widow and the golden son. It was brilliant. It was cruel, and it hurt more than I wanted to admit. Friday morning arrived with a gray steel sky. I dressed in my most professional suit, charcoal gray, sharp lines, no jewelry. I wanted to look like a stranger. I packed the scanned document, the letter from Mr. Henderson, and a notepad. The offices of Sovereign Trust were located in the county seat, a 40-minute drive away. The building was modern, all glass and polished stone. A stark contrast to the sleepy colonial architecture of my hometown. This was where the serious money lived. I took the elevator to the 4th floor. The reception area was hushed and smelled of expensive espresso. I walked up to the receptionist. "Kennedy Price," I said, "for the 10 o'clock review." "Ms. Price," she said, nodding. "They are waiting for you in conference room B." I walked down the hallway. My heels clicked on the marble. I took a deep breath, pushed open the heavy glass door, and stepped inside. The room was large, dominated by a long oval table. Lucas was already there. He was sitting on the left side, leaning back in his chair, looking relaxed, too relaxed. He wore a tailored black suit and a watch that cost more than my car. Next to him sat a woman I didn't recognize. She was young, maybe 30, with severe blonde hair and a suit that looked like armor. She was whispering something to Lucas, and he was nodding. My mother was not there. "Mr. Vance?" I asked, looking at the man at the head of the table. He stood up. He was an older man, bald, with wire-rimmed glasses and a demeanor that suggested he had seen every possible variation of family dysfunction and was impressed by none of them. "Ms. Price," he said, "please, have a seat." I sat on the opposite side of the table, facing Lucas and the woman. Lucas didn't look at me. He was busy scrolling through messages on his phone. "This is Ms. Sterling," Lucas said, waving a hand at the blonde woman without looking up. "She is acting as advisor to the family estate." Ms. Sterling gave me a tight, shark-like smile. "A pleasure," she said. Her voice was cool and devoid of warmth. "I didn't hire an advisor," I said. "She is advising the estate," Lucas said. "That includes you. Kennedy, we are just here to make sure everything is compliant so we can wrap this up. Mr. Vance cleared his throat. The sound was like a gavel striking a desk. "Let us be clear on the roles here." "Mr. Vance said, Ms. Sterling is a guest of Lucas Price. She has no standing with the trust itself. And frankly, neither does the estate of the deceased. This trust is a separate legal entity." Lucas's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. "Whatever," Lucas said. "Let's just get on with it. What is the payout?" Mr. Vance opened a thick folder in front of him. He didn't answer Lucas. He looked directly at me. "The Robert J. Price Irrevocable Trust was funded 25 years ago." "Mr. Vance began. "It was established with specific instructions that its existence be kept confidential until the passing of the grantor." "Why?" I asked. Mr. Vance adjusted his glasses. Because your father wanted the assets to mature without interference, and because the nature of the asset is complex. It is just a bank account, Lucas said, rolling his eyes. Just cut the checks. It is not a bank account. Mister, Vance said sharply. The room went silent. The trust was funded with a 40% equity stake in Price Miller Manufacturing. Mister, Vance said. I blinked. Price Miller? That was the machine shop Dad had worked at for 30 years. He was the manager. I knew he had a salary. But I never knew he owned it. Dad didn't own the company, Lucas said, laughing. He was an employee. Mister, Miller owned it. Mister, Miller owned 60%. Mister, Vance corrected. Your father purchased the other 40% in 1999. He used his savings and a loan to buy in silently. He placed those shares immediately into this trust. I did the math in my head. Price Miller wasn't just a shop anymore. They made parts for aerospace companies. They had government contracts. 40% of that company was millions. Lucas had stopped laughing. He was sitting up very straight. That is impossible, Lucas said. I have seen the company books. Dad's name isn't on the cap table. His name isn't. Mister, Vance agreed. The trust's name is, and for the last 25 years, all dividends and profits attributable to that 40% have been reinvested back into the trust. Compounding, Mister, Vance looked at me. The trust controls a significant portion of the company, Mrs. Price, and the trust instrument includes a private memorandum from your father. It dictates exactly how this power is to be used. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick document bound in blue paper. He also pulled out a smaller, sealed envelope. The envelope was yellowed with age. Written on the front in faded ink were the initials R, J, P, and the date, March 12, 1999. Before we proceed to the distribution terms, Mr. Vance said, looking at Lucas and Ms. Sterling with a stern expression, there is a requirement for full disclosure. The grantor stipulated that all interested parties must hear the terms of the memorandum together. No secrets. Ms. Sterling leaned over and whispered in Lucas's ear. Lucas looked pale. We dispute the validity of this, Lucas said, his voice higher than usual. If Dad hid this for 25 years, it is clearly fraudulent. He wasn't in his right mind. He was 45 years old and in perfect health when he signed this. Mr. Vance said, and the notary was a federal judge. It is valid. Mr. Vance slid the sealed envelope across the mahogany table toward me. It stopped inches from my hand. Kennedy, Mr. Vance said, this was left for you. Your father's instructions are that you open it now, in the presence of the other parties. I looked at the envelope. I looked at Lucas. He was staring at the paper with a mixture of greed and terror. He knew. Deep down, he knew that whatever was in there was going to destroy the story he had been telling everyone. The story he had been telling himself. I reached out and picked up the envelope. My fingers traced the letters of my father's handwriting. R, J, P. For the first time since I arrived home, I didn't feel like a guest. I felt like the person in charge. I slid my finger under the flap. The sound of tearing paper seemed to echo off the glass walls of the conference room, louder than a shout. I slid the letter out of the envelope, my fingers brushing against the texture of the old linen paper. It was preserved perfectly, uncreased and crisp, a time capsule from a man who had been dead for 2 weeks, but was currently the most powerful person in the room. Mr. Vance sat with his hands folded, waiting. Lucas was leaning forward, his jaw tight, his eyes trying to read the text through the back of the page. Ms. Sterling, the so-called advisor, was tapping a pen against her notebook in a rhythm that betrayed her agitation. I unfolded the letter. There was no date at the top, just a salutation. To my daughter, Kennedy. I felt a lump form in my throat, hard and painful. He hadn't written to Kennedy. He had written to my daughter. I began to read. If you are reading this, I am gone. I am sorry I could not be there to tell you this in person. But I know the people I live with, I know your mother, and I know your brother. They are people who believe that love is a limited resource. Like money in a bank account, they believe that if I give love to you, I am stealing it from them. I paused, my breath catching. It was brutally honest. Dad had always been quiet, a peacekeeper. To hear his voice so clear, so unvarnished, was shocking. I am writing this because I fear that when I die, they will try to rewrite our history. They will tell you that you should be grateful for whatever scraps they leave you. They will tell you that you were lucky to be taken in. I want you to know the truth. You were not lucky. I was the lucky one. You are not a guest in my family. Kennedy, you are the only reason I understood what family actually meant. Do not let them make you feel small. Do not let them buy you out. I have built this trust not just to give you money, but to give you a weapon. Use it. Love, Dad. I lowered the paper. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. I looked up at Lucas. He was staring at me, his face a mask of anxious hostility. Well, he snapped, what does it say? Some sentimental garbage about being good to your mother? I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. I slipped the envelope into my purse and zipped it shut. It says, I said, my voice steady, that he knew exactly who you were. Lucas scoffed. A short, ugly sound. He turned to Mr. Vance. Can we get to the numbers? We have other appointments. Mr. Vance adjusted his glasses. He opened the blue-bound document, the Memorandum of Trust. We need to establish the definitions before we discuss assets. Mr. Vance said, the trust uses specific language to define the hierarchy of beneficiaries. He looked down at the page. Under the terms of the instrument, Kennedy Price is designated as the eligible beneficiary. Okay, Lucas said, waving a hand. And me? Mr. Vance paused. He looked at Lucas with a gaze that was almost pitying. Lucas Price is listed as a contingent party. The heir left the room. Contingent? Lucas asked, his voice dropping an octave. What does that mean? It means, Mr. Vance explained calmly, that you are the backup. You only receive distributions from this trust in the event that Kennedy Price is deceased, incapacitated, or formally disclaimed her interest. As long as Kennedy is alive and willing to accept the inheritance, you have no claim to the assets held within this trust. Lucas stood up. His chair scraped violently against the floor. That is insane, he shouted. I am his son. I am his biological son. Ms. Sterling reached out and touched his arm. Lucas, sit down. Don't tell me to sit down, Lucas yelled, pulling away. This is a mistake. Dad wouldn't do that. He was confused. He probably didn't know what the legal terms meant. He knew exactly what they meant. Mr. Vance said, his voice hardening. The memorandum explains his reasoning in detail. Read it, I said. Mr. Vance nodded. He turned a page. Memorandum regarding beneficiary designation, dated March 12, 1999. He began to read aloud. During the adoption proceedings of Kennedy Price, a fundamental disagreement arose between myself and my wife, Deborah Price, while I viewed the adoption as the creation of a permanent daughter. Deborah expressed repeated concerns regarding the permanence of the arrangement. I froze. I stared at the table, my vision blurring at the edges. Mr. Vance continued, his voice monotone, but the words landing like blows. Despite the finalization of the adoption decree, Deborah continued to refer to Kennedy in private as the placement and temporary. She refused to put Kennedy's name on the family savings bonds. She argued that if we had a biological child later, Kennedy should be returned or prioritized differently. I am creating this trust to ensure that Kennedy is protected from this distinction. I fear that upon my death, the family will attempt to categorize her as lesser to secure assets for a biological heir. The room was spinning. Temporary. That was the word. Temporary. I thought back to my childhood, the way Mom would introduce me to people. This is Kennedy. She is with us right now. I had always thought she meant with us at the store or with us for the day. I never realized she meant with us until we change our minds. It explained everything. It explained why I never got new clothes. Only hand-me-downs from cousins. It explained why my college fund was a fraction of Lucas's. It explained the coldness in her eyes when I called her mom in public. She had never really been my mother. She had been my landlord. I looked at Lucas. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the table, his face pale. He knew. He had grown up hearing it. "That is a lie," Lucas whispered. "Mom never said that. It is a notarized statement." "Mister," Vance said, "your father recorded a sworn affidavit with the family court on the same day he signed this trust. He wanted to make sure that no one could ever claim the adoption didn't count emotionally or legally. This trust is the safeguard." Lucas slammed his fist on the table. "This is manipulation," he screamed. "This is manipulation from beyond the grave." He was clearly paranoid. Mom loved her. We all loved her. This is just him trying to punish Mom for what? "Lucas?" I asked quietly. "For telling the truth?" Lucas pointed a finger at me. "You are enjoying this. You are sitting there, judging us, acting like you are the victim. You have always been the victim. Kennedy. Poor little orphan Kennedy. Mr. Vance cleared his throat loudly. "Mr. Price, I would advise you to control your temper. We are not finished. We are finished," Lucas shouted. "I am contesting this. I am challenging the competency of the grantor. There is no way he wrote this. I saw the 2014 addendum. It said—" He stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. "Mr. Vance slowly took off his glasses. He placed them on the table. "The 2014 addendum?" "Mr. Vance repeated softly. Lucas's eyes darted around the room. He looked like a trapped animal. I heard about it." Lucas stammered. "I heard he was thinking about changing it. Mr. Vance opened a different folder. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a computer log. "It is interesting you should mention that," Mr. Vance said, "because there is no valid 2014 addendum. However, our records show that 3 attempts were made to access the digital draft of this trust in the last 6 months. Lucas swallowed hard. "The attempts were made using your father's credentials," Mr. Vance continued. "But the IP address didn't match your father's home computer. It matched a mobile device registered to a corporate account." Mr. Vance looked at Mrs. Sterling. "Yours, I believe." "Mrs. Sterling?" Mrs. Sterling didn't move. Her face was a mask of professional detachment, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her pen. "I was merely assisting Mr. Price in organizing his father's estate," she said smoothly. "We were looking for all active documents. We didn't change anything." Mr. Vance looked back at the log. "You didn't change anything because you couldn't," he said. "The system rejected the modifications because they required a biometric signature, but the attempt was made. Specifically, an attempt to remove the eligible beneficiary clause and replace it with a standard spousal transfer." I felt a wave of nausea. They hadn't just ignored the trust. They had tried to delete me from it, while Dad was dying, while he was in the hospital, gasping for breath, trusting Lucas to handle his affairs. Lucas was trying to erase his final act of protection. It wasn't just greed, it was hatred. My phone buzzed on the table. I ignored it. Lucas stood up again. "I need to call my mother. She is already here," I said. Lucas looked at me. "What?" "I saw her car in the parking lot." I lied, but it turned out to be the truth. The door to the conference room opened. My mother stood there. She was wearing a black dress and oversized sunglasses. She looked small, fragile, and utterly out of place in the corporate glass box. "Mom?" Lucas said. "I told you to wait in the lobby." "I couldn't wait," she said, her voice trembling. I knew something was wrong. I could feel it. She walked into the room and looked at me. She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red and puffy. "Kennedy," she said. I didn't stand up. I didn't offer her a chair. I just looked at her. "We know." "Mom," I said. "Know what?" she asked, looking between me and Lucas. "We know about the adoption," I said. "We know you called me temporary. We know you didn't want me." She froze. Her hand went to her throat, clutching her pearls. "Who told you that?" she whispered. "Dad did." I said, 25 years ago. She collapsed into the chair next to Lucas. She buried her face in her hands and started to sob. It was a loud, theatrical sobbing that I had seen 1,000 times. It was designed to make everyone stop and comfort her. I didn't move. It wasn't like that. She wailed. I was scared. I was young. I didn't know if I could love another woman's child. It is complicated. Kennedy, you don't understand what it is like for a mother. You are right, I said coldly. I don't understand. Because I am not a mother, and apparently, neither were you. She looked up. Her face streaked with tears. The sadness vanished, replaced by a flash of anger. How can you say that? She snapped. I fed you. I clothed you. I drove you to soccer practice. I gave you a home. You gave me a room. I corrected. Dad gave me a home. She reached out across the table, her hand trembling. Kennedy, please, we are family. You can't let money destroy us. I said things in the past. People say things. But we are here now. Your father is gone. We only have each other. You have to forgive me. That is what family does. I looked at her hand. It was manicured. Perfect. The same hand that had slapped my hand away from the photo drawer 3 days ago. That is what family does. She was weaponizing the word she had denied me my whole life. She was using family as a shield to protect herself from the consequences of her own cruelty. I leaned forward. You told me I wasn't real family. I said quietly. You told me that my whole life. You can't use the card you threw away. Mr. Vance cleared his throat again. He seemed immune to the emotional violence unfolding in the room. He was a creature of contracts and statutes. Mrs. Price, seeing as you are here, we need to discuss the conditions of the distribution. Conditions? Lucas asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. What conditions? The trust holds 40% of Price Miller Manufacturing. Mr. Vance said. However, the grantor was aware that the company's finances have been opaque in recent years. He turned a page in the memorandum. Condition 4. Independent audit. He looked up. Before any distribution can be made to the eligible beneficiary, and before any dividends can be released. The trust requires a full forensic audit of Price Miller Manufacturing for the 5 years preceding my death. Lucas went white, not pale, white. An audit? He choked out. That is ridiculous. The company is private. You can't just audit a private company. The trust owns 40%. Mr. Vance reminded him, as a major shareholder, the trust has the right to inspect the books, and the grantor has made it a mandatory condition. No audit, no money. We don't have time for an audit. Lucas said fast. Too fast. It will take months. It will disrupt operations. The employees will get scared. We can't do that. Why not? I asked. I was watching him closely now. The panic in his eyes was genuine terror. Because it is unnecessary, Lucas shouted. I have the books. I can show you the spreadsheets. We don't need some outsider digging through our receipts. Ms. Sterling spoke up. Her voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge to it. Lucas is right. An external audit could damage the company's reputation. Perhaps we can come to an arrangement, a waiver of the condition? Mr. Vance shook his head. The condition is non-negotiable. The grantor was very specific. He suspected that funds were being diverted. Diverted? Mom asked, looking at Lucas. What does that mean? It means stolen. Mom, I said, I didn't steal anything, Lucas yelled. He was standing again, his hands gripping the edge of the table. I ran that company. I kept it afloat while Dad was sick. I deserve to be paid for my work. Then the audit will show that. Mr. Vance said simply, if you were paid a fair salary and the expenses were legitimate, you have nothing to worry about. Lucas sank back into his chair. He looked defeated. Mom looked at him, confusion dawning on her face. Lucas? She asked. Why are you so upset about an audit? Lucas didn't answer her. He was staring at the table, calculating. Mr. Vance closed the folder. We have scheduled the forensic accounting firm to begin on Monday. They will require access to all bank statements, invoices, and payroll records. He looked at Lucas, then at Mom, then at me. I must also warn you, Mr. Vance said, his voice dropping to a serious, warning tone. The trust contains a penalty clause. It is similar to a no contest clause, but broader. He read from the document. If any party attempts to obstruct, delay, or falsify the results of the mandated audit, or if any party challenges the validity of this trust in court, that party shall be permanently disinherited from any future distribution, including any assets that might pour over from my personal estate. He closed the blue binder. In plain English, if you try to stop the audit, or if you sue to stop Kennedy, you lose everything, not just the trust money. You lose your claim to the house, the cars, and the personal accounts. The room was silent. The threat hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Kennedy, Mom whispered, you can't let them do this. Lucas has worked so hard. I looked at my mother. I looked at the woman who had called me temporary. I looked at the brother who had tried to erase me with a biometric hack. I stood up. I picked up my purse. I don't have to let them do anything. Mom, I said, Dad is doing this. I am just the messenger. I turned to Mr. Vance. I will make myself available for the audit team. I said, I have some old records Dad sent me that might be useful for comparison. Lucas's head snapped up. Records? I smiled. It was a cold, tight smile. Household records. I said, you remember, the ones you thought were just trash. I walked toward the door. Kennedy, Mom called out. Where are you going? I stopped at the glass door and looked back. I am going to get lunch, I said. And then I am going to find a hotel. I don't think I should stay in the guest room anymore. Why not? She asked, her voice trembling. Because, I said, I am not a guest. I pushed the door open and walked out, leaving them trapped in the glass box with the truth they had spent 25 years trying to bury. As I walked down the hall, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't happiness. It was heavier than that. It was the feeling of gravity shifting. For 33 years, I had been fighting to stay upright on a tilted floor. Now, finally, the floor was leveling out, but I knew it wasn't over. Lucas looked cornered, and cornered animals didn't just surrender. He had Ms. Sterling, and he had secrets that were worth millions. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. Let the audit begin. The transition from daughter to plaintiff is a slow, suffocating process. It happens in billable hours and forensic spreadsheets rather than dramatic arguments. I had moved into a Holiday Inn on the outskirts of town, refusing to sleep another night under the roof where I was considered a guest. My room was small, smelling of industrial cleaner and stale air conditioning. But it was mine. It was the command center for a war I hadn't started but was determined to finish. I hired David Rosen, a forensic accountant recommended by Sarah Jenkins. David was a man who looked like he had been born wearing a rumpled suit. He spoke in a monotone that made embezzlement sound like a grocery list, which I found strangely comforting. We met in Sarah's office on a Tuesday morning. The table was covered in bank statements I had retrieved from the household records file and new data David had pulled using the trust's authority. Here's the baseline, David said, sliding a graph across the table, for 20 years. Price Miller Manufacturing was a boring, profitable machine. Revenue came in, expenses went out, dividends were reinvested into the trust. Your father ran a tight ship. He pointed to the far right of the graph, where the line took a sharp, jagged dip. This is 6 months ago, David said. Coinciding with your father's first major hospitalization, I looked at the numbers. The dip wasn't a subtle curve. It was a cliff. What happened? I asked. Did business slow down? No, David said. Revenue remained stable. The dip is in operating expenses, specifically. A new category labeled external consultation fees. He pulled out a stack of invoices. They were generic, the kind you could download from a template website. The logo at the top read S.P. Group, $75,000. David said, in 4 months, paid to S.P. Group for strategic realignment services. I stared at the invoices. $75,000. That was more than I made in a year. Who is SSP Group? I asked. David adjusted his glasses. It is a limited liability company formed in Delaware 5 months ago. The registered agent is a shell service, but the mailing address for the invoices? He tapped the paper. It is a P.O. box in the same building as Ms. Sterling's office. I felt a cold flash of recognition. Sterling, the advisor, the woman who had sat next to Lucas at the meeting, looking at me like I was something she had scraped off her shoe. Lucas is paying her, I said. He is paying her with company money. It looks like it. David said, but it gets messier. These payments weren't authorized by your father. The dates align with the weeks he was in the ICU or heavily sedated. I felt sick while I was sitting by Dad's bedside, holding his hand, watching him fade. Lucas was in the office writing checks to his girlfriend or co-conspirator. We need more, Sarah said from her desk. We need to prove Lucas knew he wasn't authorized. We need a timeline. I spent the next 2 days building that timeline. I went through my text messages with Lucas from the last 6 months. I cross-referenced them with the invoice dates. October 12th. Invoice for $15,000. October 12th text from Lucas. Dad is having a bad day. Don't call. I am handling the doctors. November 4th. Invoice for $20,000. November 4th. Text from Lucas. Too busy to talk. Dealing with a crisis at the plant. Dad would want me to focus. He had used Dad's illness as a shield to loot the company. I needed to look him in the eye. I needed to see if there was any part of my brother left, or if he had been fully consumed by the person he was pretending to be. I texted him, meet me at the boathouse, 6 o'clock, alone. He didn't reply, but he showed up. The boathouse was a dive bar on the river, a place we used to go in high school before we drifted apart. It was dark, noisy, and neutral ground. Lucas walked in wearing a polo shirt and khakis, looking like he had just come from the country club. He spotted me in a booth in the back and slid in opposite me. He didn't order a drink. You look tired. Kennedy, he said. His voice was casual, friendly even. It was the voice he used when he wanted to borrow money or get out of trouble. I am tired. Lucas, I said, I am tired of living in a hotel. I am tired of lawyers. And I am tired of finding invoices for S.P. Group. His smile didn't falter, but his eyes went flat. Business expenses. He said lightly, you wouldn't understand. The corporate world is complex. You are a graphic designer. Kennedy, you draw logos. You don't run companies. I know what a kickback looks like. I said, Ms. Sterling, SSP, Sterling Strategic Partners. It wasn't exactly a difficult code to crack. Lucas leaned back, crossing his arms. She is a valuable consultant. She is helping us modernize. Dad was stuck in the past. He was hoarding cash in that trust when we could have been expanding. Dad was protecting the company. I said, and he was protecting me. Lucas let out a short, derisive laugh. Protecting you? Kennedy, grow up. He was managing you. He knew you couldn't handle the real world. So he set up a little allowance, but you are taking it too far. You are digging into things that are going to hurt people. The only person it is going to hurt is the person stealing. I said. He leaned forward, his face changing. The charm evaporated, replaced by a sneer that made him look exactly like our mother. You don't belong here, he hissed. You never did. You think because Dad signed a paper 25 years ago that you are one of us? You are not. You are a charity case that outstayed its welcome. I didn't flinch. I had heard variations of this my whole life, usually whispered or implied. Hearing it said out loud was almost relieving. Is that what you tell yourself? I asked, to justify forging his signature? Lucas froze. I didn't forge anything, he said, his voice dropping. We will see what the handwriting expert says, I said. Lucas stared at me for a long moment. Then, slowly, the smile returned. It was a cruel, dangerous smile. You know, Kennedy, he said softly, I was talking to some people in the city yesterday, friends of friends. They know your boss at the agency, Karen, right? My stomach dropped. How did he know Karen's name? I heard the agency is looking to trim the fat. Lucas continued, examining his fingernails. They are very concerned about employee stability. It would be a shame if they heard rumors that one of their designers was having a mental breakdown, that she was harassing her grieving family for money, that she was unstable. I gripped the edge of the table. You wouldn't, I whispered. I am just saying, Lucas said, sliding out of the booth. Reputation is everything. Kennedy, you are trying to ruin mine. Just remember that I can reach yours too. He walked out of the bar, leaving me shaking in the darkness. I drove back to the hotel, my heart pounding. I checked my work email on my phone. Nothing. But the next morning, the call came. I was sitting in the hotel lobby, drinking bad coffee. When my phone rang, it was Karen. Hi, Kennedy, she said. Her voice was stiff, formal. Hi, Karen, I said. I am planning to be back on Monday. The funeral arrangements are… Yeah, about that. Karen interrupted. Listen, we had a weird call yesterday. A reference check, sort of. Someone claiming to be a creditor asking about garnishing your wages. And then another call from someone saying they were a concerned family member, asking if we offered counseling services. I closed my eyes. He had done it. He had actually done it. Karen, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I am not in debt, and I am not unstable. My family situation is legally complex right now. There is a dispute over the estate. Look, Kennedy, Karen said, we love your work, but the agency is client-facing. We can't have drama spilling over into the office. Maybe you should take some unpaid leave, just until this sorts itself out. Unpaid leave. It was a polite way of saying we are benching you. Lucas had touched my livelihood. He had crossed the line from greedy brother to active enemy. He wasn't just trying to keep the inheritance. He was trying to break me so I wouldn't have the resources to fight him. I hung up the phone. I didn't cry. I was past crying. I needed to find something he couldn't spin. I needed Dad's voice. I remembered the keychain. When I had tried to take the photos from Dad's desk, Mom had stopped me. But before that, I had grabbed his spare set of keys from the hook by the door. I still had them in my purse. Most were standard: house, car, office, but there was one small, silver key with a number stamped on it, 202. And on the ring, a faded plastic tag that read, "You store it." I knew the place. It was a self-storage facility on the highway, past the old fairgrounds. I drove there in a daze. The facility was a maze of orange metal doors. I found Unit 202 down a long, echoing corridor. I inserted the key. It turned. I rolled up the door. The unit was small, 5 by 5. It wasn't packed with furniture. It was filled with boxes, banker's boxes, stacked neatly against the wall. I pulled down the first one. It was labeled Taxes, 1990 to 2000. I opened it. Just receipts. I pulled down the second one. Price Miller Ops. I kept digging. I didn't know what I was looking for. But I knew Dad. He was a man who wrote things down. He didn't trust computers. And he didn't trust people who changed their stories. In the back corner, under a stack of old National Geographic magazines, I found a wooden box. It was an old cigar humidor. I opened it. Inside were 3 things: a heavy leather-bound notebook, a stack of partnership agreements, and a deed. I opened the notebook first. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger of sorts, but not for money. The first page was dated 1999, March 12th. Finalized the adoption. Deborah is unhappy. She says the baby cries too much. I told her babies cry. She says this one cries differently. I made a promise to Kennedy today while she was sleeping. I promised she would never know she wasn't wanted by everyone. I sat down on the dusty concrete floor, the book trembling in my hands. I turned the pages. He had written an entry once a year, usually around my birthday, 2003. Kennedy turned 4. She caught a frog in the yard. She wasn't scared of the warts. She has grit. Lucas is afraid of dirt. Deborah scolds her for being messy. I told Deborah that dirt washes off, but fear sticks. 2010. Kennedy made the honor roll. Deborah didn't put it on the fridge because Lucas got a C in math, and she didn't want him to feel bad. I took Kennedy for ice cream and told her I was proud. I put her report card in my desk. 2018. Kennedy graduated college. Magna cum laude. I paid off her loans today. I told Deborah it was a scholarship. She would be furious if she knew I used the bonus money. She thinks that money should go to the house renovations. Tears were streaming down my face now. He had seen it all. He had seen the small cruelties, the erasures, the subtle favoritism, and he had fought it in the only way he knew how. Quietly, secretly, financially. I turned to the back of the book. There was a folded paper clipped to the page. It was a deed to the family house, and attached to it was a foreclosure notice from 20 years ago. I read the entry next to it. 2004. The business is tight. We almost missed the mortgage. The bank threatened to take the house. Deborah had a panic attack. She screamed that we shouldn't have taken on the extra expense of a second child. She blames Kennedy for the financial stress. She doesn't understand that the stress is the market, not the girl. I had to leverage the house to buy into the partnership. If this doesn't work, we lose everything. I must ensure the trust is separate. If we go down, Kennedy's future must not go down with us. I stared at the words. She blames Kennedy for the financial stress. It clicked. The resentment wasn't just about biology. It was about money. It always is. Mom saw me as a bill. She saw me as the reason they almost lost their status, their home, their security, in her mind. I was the expensive mistake that nearly bankrupted them. And Dad knew. He knew that if he left me money in a will, she would take it as repayment for the burden I had been. So he locked it away in a trust where she couldn't touch it. I closed the book. I felt a profound, aching love for this man who had lived a double life in his own home just to protect me. I packed the box into my car. I had the emotional truth. Now I needed the forensic truth. David called me 2 days later. We have it, he said. I went to Sarah's office. David had a final report bound in a plastic cover. He opened it to page 10. Here's the smoking gun, David said. He pointed to a scanned image of a wire transfer authorization. It was for $30,000, sent to S.P. Group. The signature at the bottom read, Robert J. Price. Now look at this, David said. He placed a transparency over the signature. It was a perfect match for a signature from a check Dad had written 10 years ago. It is a trace, David said, a digital lift. No human signs their name exactly the same way twice. The loops, the pressure points, they are identical down to the pixel. This signature was copied and pasted from an old document. And who had access to the old documents? I asked. Lucas, Sarah said, and Mrs. Sterling. David flipped the page. And here's the kicker. I traced the money after it hit the SSP account. It didn't stay there. It was withdrawn in cash and cashier's checks. Most of it went to a creditor in Las Vegas. Vegas? I asked. Your brother has a gambling problem. Kennedy, David said, or at least a significant debt. We found records of him taking business trips to Nevada 4 times last year. He lost big. He was using the company as his piggy bank to pay off the sharks. And the plan? I asked. The plan was to blame the company downturn after your father died. David said he was going to claim the business was failing, sell the assets, including the trust share, at a fire sale price to a buyer he controlled, and wash the debt away. He needed you to be the ignorant, grieving sister who just signed whatever he put in front of her. He was going to gut the company. I said he was going to destroy Dad's legacy to cover his bets, and he was going to leave you with nothing. Sarah added. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was a crime scene. I need to see my mother. I said. Sarah hesitated. Kennedy, I advise against it. Let us handle it legally. I need to look her in the eye. Sarah, I need to know if she knows. I drove to the house. It was late afternoon. The funeral was tomorrow. The house was full of flowers. I walked in. The door was unlocked. Mom was in the kitchen, polishing silver. She looked up when I entered. She looked tired, her face drawn. "Kennedy," she said, "I thought you were staying at a hotel." "I am." I said, "I just came to show you something." I placed the forensic report on the table. I opened it to the page with the trace signature and the Las Vegas transfers. "What is this?" she asked, wiping her hands on a towel. "It is proof." "Mom," I said, "Lucas has been stealing from the company. He forged Dad's signature. He sent the money to Vegas." She looked at the papers. She didn't read them. She just stared at the graphics, the red arrows, the numbers. She didn't look surprised. "You knew," I whispered. She looked up. Her eyes were hard. "He made a mistake, Kennedy. He got in over his head. He is young. Men make mistakes. He committed a felony." "Mom," I shouted, "he stole from the business Dad built. He tried to steal from me. He was trying to save us," she snapped. "He was trying to fix it before your father found out. He didn't want to disappoint him, so he robbed him instead." Mom slammed the silver fork down on the table. "What do you want, Kennedy? Do you want to send your brother to jail? Is that it? Do you want to destroy this family? You destroyed this family 20 years ago when you decided I was a burden," I said, my voice shaking. She took a breath. She smoothed her apron. When she spoke again, her voice was calm, transactional. "We have a life insurance policy," she said. "It is outside the trust. It pays out $500,000. I stared at her. "I can give you $50,000, she said. "Cash, right now. You take it, you sign a waiver, and you go back to the city. You leave Lucas alone. You leave the company alone." I felt like I had been slapped. $50,000, I repeated. "That is my price? That is what I'm worth to you? A payoff to make me go away? It is a lot of money." "Kennedy," she said, her eyes pleading, "you could buy a new car. You could pay off your loans. Just let us handle our own affairs, even now." I wasn't part of the "our." I looked at the woman who had raised me. I looked for any sign of love, of regret, of maternal instinct. All I saw was a woman trying to balance a ledger. She was protecting her investment. She was protecting her biological son. I was just a liability to be liquidated. I picked up the report. "No, Mom," I said. "Kennedy, be reasonable. I am being reasonable." I said, "I am declining your offer." I turned and walked to the door. "If you walk out that door," she called after me, her voice rising to a shriek, "don't you dare come to the funeral. You are dead to us." I stopped. I didn't turn around. "I have been dead to you for 25 years. "Mom," I said. I just finally realized it. I walked out. I drove straight to Sarah's office. I was done being sad. I was done being the victim. "Draft the letter," I told Sarah. She looked up from her computer. "You are sure?" "I am sure." We spent the next hour drafting the formal notice. It wasn't a plea. It was a command. To Lucas Price and Deborah Price, you are hereby notified that Kennedy Price, as the primary eligible beneficiary of the Robert J. Price Trust, demands the immediate preservation of all corporate and personal financial records. Any destruction, alteration, or concealment of evidence will be met with immediate civil litigation and referral to criminal authorities for fraud and embezzlement. Furthermore, be advised that the audit will proceed as scheduled. Any interference will trigger the penalty clause of the trust, resulting in total disinheritance. Govern yourself accordingly. I signed it. The pen felt heavy in my hand, but my signature was steady. "Send it," I said. Sarah faxed it. We watched the machine whir and beep. "Sent," she said. I walked out into the cool evening air. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I was alone. I had no parents, no brother, no home to go back to, but I had the notebook in my car. I had the truth, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for permission to exist. I was demanding it. The funeral was tomorrow, and I was going to be there, not as a guest, not as a ghost, but as the owner. The The conference room at Sovereign Trust had not changed in the week since our last meeting, but the atmosphere inside it had thickened. The air felt pressurized, like the moments before a thunderstorm breaks, charged with the static of accumulated lies and imminent consequences. I sat on the right side of the mahogany table, flanked by Sarah Jenkins and David Rosen, the forensic accountant. On the table in front of us sat a stack of binders 3 inches thick, the preliminary audit report. It was a physical manifestation of my brother's betrayal. Bound in black plastic, across from us, the opposition had rearranged its lines. Ms. Sterling was still there, though she looked less like a corporate shark and more like a cornered fox today. Her perfect posture was rigid, brittle. Lucas sat next to her, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at a spot on the carpet, his jaw working silently, and there was a new face. Sitting at the head of their side was a man who introduced himself as Arthur Moretti. He was an expensive suit with a voice like gravel, the kind of lawyer you hired when you weren't trying to find the truth, but trying to bury it. My mother sat at the far end, separated from everyone by a deliberate empty chair. She wore black again, but this time it didn't look like mourning. It looked like a costume she was tired of wearing. Mr. Vance entered the room at exactly 10 o'clock. He carried no files, only a single sheet of paper. He sat at the head of the table, folded his hands, and looked at us over the rim of his glasses. We are here to review the findings of the forensic audit regarding Price Miller Manufacturing. Mr. Vance said, his voice devoid of inflection, and to determine if the penalty provisions of the Robert J. Price Trust must be enacted. Mr. Moretti leaned forward instantly. Before we proceed to any findings, he rumbled, I must state for the record that my client, Lucas Price, contests the validity of the trust instrument itself. I felt Sarah stiffen beside me. We had expected resistance, but this was a direct assault. On what grounds? Mr. Vance asked, appearing bored rather than alarmed. Competency, Moretti said. He slid a folder across the table. We have testimony from family members indicating that in the months leading up to his death, and indeed for years prior, Robert Price was suffering from cognitive decline. He was paranoid. He was secretive. He was making decisions that were out of character for a prudent businessman. We argue that the trust, and specifically the restrictive memorandums, were the product of a mind that was not sound. I felt a hot flush of rage climb up my neck. They were doing it. They were gaslighting a dead man to save their own skins. They were willing to paint my father, the sharpest, most deliberate man I had ever known, as senile. It was a second death. They were killing his reputation just as they had buried his body. Lucas, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet, you know that is a lie. Dad did the crossword puzzle in pen every Sunday until the week he died. Lucas didn't look up. Moretti answered for him. The family reports behavior that suggests otherwise. Ms. Price, hoarding documents, hiding assets. These are signs of dementia, not strategy. I looked at Mom. She was staring out the window at the gray skyline. She was letting this happen. She was letting them call her husband crazy because the alternative was admitting he was right. Sarah Jenkins cleared her throat. She didn't open a folder. She didn't need to. Mr. Moretti, Sarah said, her voice sharp as a scalpel. If you are going to claim incompetency, you might want to check the dates on your own client's behavior. She placed a single document on the table. This is a notarized affidavit from Dr. Eris Thorne, Robert Price's primary oncologist and general practitioner for 20 years. It is dated 3 days before Robert passed. Moretti frowned. He picked up the paper. It states, Sarah continued, that Robert Price was fully oriented, alert, and cognitively intact during all visits. It specifically notes that he asked detailed questions about his medication interactions and managed his own dosage schedule. She slapped another document down, and this, she said, is an email chain between Robert Price and his lead engineer at the factory, dated 2 months ago. In it, Robert corrects a rounding error in a supply chain spreadsheet that saved the company $12,000. Does that sound like a man in cognitive decline? Moretti read the papers. His expression didn't change, but he stopped leaning forward. Furthermore, Sarah added, driving the nail in, the trust was reaffirmed by Robert Price 6 months ago when he updated the beneficiary contact information. That reaffirmation was witnessed by 2 bank officers who have provided sworn statements that he was lucid, joking, and articulate. If you pursue this incompetency claim in court, we will move for sanctions against you for filing a frivolous motion, and we will win. The silence that followed was heavy. The attack had failed before it even started. Lucas finally looked up, and I saw the fear behind his eyes. He had pinned his hopes on erasing Dad's mind, and the paper trail had just walled him in. Mister, Vance adjusted his glasses. If we are quite done with the theatrics, he said, we will proceed to the audit findings. He nodded to David Rosen. David opened the black binder. The audit has confirmed a pattern of irregular disbursements from Price Miller Manufacturing to an entity known as S.P. Group, David said. The total amount diverted is $142,000 over a period of 8 months. He looked at Ms. Sterling. Ms. Sterling, David said, you are the registered agent for S.P. Group. Can you explain the services provided for these invoices? Ms. Sterling straightened her jacket. Her voice was steady, but her hands were clenched in her lap. We provided strategic consulting, she said. Market analysis, rebranding strategies. We found no work product, David said. No reports, no slide decks, no emails delivering analysis. We did, however, find that the funds transferred to S.P. Group were immediately withdrawn as cash or transferred to personal accounts held by Lucas Price. She said nothing. This is embezzlement, David said simply. It is theft of corporate assets. And because the trust is a 40% shareholder, it is theft from the trust. Mom made a noise, a sharp intake of breath. She turned to Lucas. You said it was investing, she whispered. You told me you were investing in a new partnership. I was, Lucas snapped, his voice cracking. I was trying to fix the cash flow. I just needed a bridge loan. A bridge loan you took without asking, from a company you didn't fully own, to pay gambling debts in Vegas. I said, Lucas glared at me. You don't know what you're talking about. You have never had to carry the weight of this family. You just show up with your hand out. Mister? Vance held up a hand. The criminality of these actions will be a matter for the authorities, should the trust choose to refer the case. Vance said, but there is another matter, a matter of the grantor's intent. He opened the blue trust binder again. The trust includes a letter of wishes, Vance said. It is a non-binding but instructional document that guides the trustee in discretionary matters. He looked at Lucas. Your father anticipated this situation. Mr. Price? What situation? Lucas asked aggressively. The situation where his children felt entitled to his life's work. Vance said. He began to read. It is my wish that upon my death, the management of Price Miller Manufacturing be transferred to a professional. Independent executive appointed by the trustee. I do not wish for my son, Lucas Price, or my wife, Deborah Price, to assume operational control. While I love my family, I have observed that personal ambition often clouds their judgment regarding the business's long-term health. I fear nepotism will destroy what I built. The business is to be an asset that supports them, not a playground for them to manage. The words hung in the air. Playground. It was the ultimate rejection. Dad hadn't just protected the money, he had protected the work. He had looked at his son, his golden biological son, and decided he wasn't good enough to run the machine. Mom stood up. Her chair fell backward with a crash. How dare you? She screamed. She wasn't looking at Lucas. She was looking at me. And then at Mr. Vance. You are turning strangers against us, she yelled, her face red and distorted. That business is our name. It is Price Miller. It belongs to the family. How can you sit there and read a letter that takes it away from his own son? Mrs. Price, Mr. Vance said calmly. The trust exists to protect the assets from misuse. The audit we just reviewed proves exactly why your husband was concerned. His son was stealing from the company. The strangers you are afraid of are the only ones who can save it from bankruptcy. I don't care about bankruptcy, she shouted. I care about loyalty. Kennedy, stop this. Tell them to stop. You are the beneficiary, aren't you? Tell them to let Lucas run the company. I looked at my mother. She was hysterical, terrified, and completely irrational. She would rather see the company burn to the ground with Lucas at the wheel than see it flourish in competent hands. I can't do that. Mom, I said quietly. You won't do that, she accused. You want to see him fail. You are doing this out of spite because we didn't buy you a pony when you were 6. Because you always felt left out. I felt a profound sadness wash over me. She really believed that. She really believed this was about childhood petty grievances. Not grand larceny. It is not about spite. Mom, I said, it is about the fact that Lucas is a criminal, and I am not going to let him rob the only thing Dad has left. Moretti, the lawyer, stepped in. He sensed that the emotional explosion was not helping his legal standing. Sit down, Mrs. Price, he murmured, guiding her back to a chair. He turned to Mr. Vance. We recognize that the audit presents challenges, Moretti said, choosing his words carefully, and we recognize that the trust has significant leverage here. He looked at me. My client is prepared to offer a global settlement to resolve all issues, the trust, the company, the allegations of impropriety, everything. He pulled a document from his briefcase and slid it across the table to Sarah. We are prepared to offer Kennedy Price a lump sum payment of $300,000, paid from the personal estate of Deborah Price. In exchange, Kennedy will disclaim her interest in the trust, sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the audit findings, and waive any future claims against the estate or the company. Sarah looked at the number. She looked at me. $300,000. It was a lot of money. It was enough to pay off my student loans, buy a condo in the city, and have a cushion for years. It was freedom, and all I had to do was walk away. All I had to do was sign a piece of paper that said, yes, I am not really part of this family. Yes, I will keep your secrets. Yes, you can buy my silence. I looked at the check on the table. It was tempting. God, it was tempting. The last 2 weeks had been a nightmare of stress, hostility, and hotel rooms. I could end it right now. I could take the check, get in my car, and never look back. I could leave them to their rot. Sarah leaned over and whispered in my ear. It is a lowball, she said softly. The trust's share of the company is worth millions, but it is clean cash. It is an exit. I looked at Lucas. He was watching me with a mixture of hope and arrogance. He thought he had me. He thought everyone had a price, and he had just found mine. He thought that because I was the poor relation, I would jump at the sight of 6 figures. I looked at Mom. She had stopped crying. She was watching me too, expecting me to take it. In her eyes, this was generous. She was giving me money. She was fixing the problem with a check, just like they always did. And that was the problem. If I took the money, I was accepting their version of reality. I was accepting that my dignity was for sale. I was accepting that peace was more important than truth. I thought about the voice on the phone that had warned me. They'll try to run out the clock. I thought about Dad's notebook. I promised she would never know she wasn't wanted. Taking this money would be admitting I wasn't wanted. It would be a severance package for my own life. I realized then that I had been trained for this moment. My whole childhood. I had been trained to be the easy one, the one who didn't make a fuss, the one who was grateful for whatever was left over. Kennedy is so low maintenance. They used to say, Kennedy never complains. They had weaponized my gratitude. They had turned my desire to belong into a leash, but the leash was broken. Dad had cut it. I looked at the settlement offer. I reached out and picked it up. The room went silent. Lucas leaned forward, thinking I was going to sign. I slowly tore the paper in half. Then I tore it again. I dropped the pieces on the mahogany table. No, I said. Lucas's face fell. You are crazy, he muttered. That is more money than you will see in a lifetime. I don't want your hush money. Lucas, I said, and I don't want to leave. I turned to Sarah. Tell them the counteroffer. I said. Sarah smiled. It was a genuine, predatory smile. She opened her notebook. Ms. Price rejects the settlement, Sarah announced. Here are her terms. She listed them, counting on her fingers. 1. Immediate restitution of the $142,000 stolen from the company. To be paid by Lucas Price personally, if he cannot pay, his shares in the company will be liquidated to cover the debt. 2. Sarah continued. Lucas Price will be removed immediately from any operational role at Price Miller Manufacturing. He will be barred from the premises and restricted from accessing any corporate accounts. 3. The trust will exercise its right to appoint an independent CEO, as per the grantor's wishes. And 4, Sarah said, looking directly at Mom, a written acknowledgement, signed by Deborah Price and Lucas Price, stating that Kennedy Price is the sole and rightful primary beneficiary of the Robert J. Price Trust, and that no further challenges to her status or the trust's validity will be made. Mom gasped. You want me to sign a paper? A paper saying what? Saying that I am his daughter. Mom, I said, and that you can't erase me. This is blackmail, Lucas shouted. No, mister, Vance interrupted, his voice cutting like a whip. This is the alternative to prison. Mister? Vance looked at Moretti. Counselor, he said, the audit findings are sufficient to trigger a criminal referral today. We are obligated as fiduciaries to report embezzlement. However, if a settlement is reached that makes the trust whole and secures the assets, we have some discretion on how to proceed. He paused. Kennedy's terms restore the assets, they secure the company, and they align with the grantor's letter of wishes. If you refuse these terms, I will trigger the penalty clause immediately. Lucas will be disinherited entirely, and I will call the district attorney. Moretti looked at his client. He looked at the shredded check on the table. He knew when he was beaten. He leaned over and whispered to Lucas. Lucas turned purple, shaking his head violently. Moretti whispered again, sharper this time. He pointed to the audit binders. Lucas slumped in his chair. He looked small. The bravado was gone. He looked like a child who had broken a vase and realized he couldn't hide the pieces. Fine, Lucas whispered. Mom looked at him. Lucas? You are just going to give up? I don't have a choice. Mom, he snapped at her, tears finally spilling over. I don't have the money. I lost it all. If they sue me, I go to jail. Mom went silent. She looked at me. Her eyes were wide, fearful. She was seeing me for the first time. I realized, not as Kennedy the guest, not as Kennedy the burden, but as Kennedy the power. It terrified her. Mr. Vance nodded. Very well. We will draft the formal agreement. He opened his calendar. We will schedule the final execution meeting for Friday at noon. Vance said, at that time, the restitution will be paid, the resignations will be signed, and the acknowledgement will be executed. He looked at me. Once those documents are signed, Ms. Price, the trust distribution schedule will activate. You will effectively become the majority stakeholder in the family business. He closed the folder. Friday at noon. He repeated, do not be late. And gentlemen, if any assets move between now and then, the deal is off. I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but I held myself upright. I walked past Lucas. He didn't look at me. I walked past Mom. She reached out a hand, as if to touch my arm, then pulled it back. I walked out of the conference room and into the hallway. Sarah followed me. You did good, Kennedy, she said softly. You did really good. I took a deep breath. The air in the hallway was cool and sterile. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel happy. I felt exhausted. I felt the weight of the bridge I had just burned. But as I walked toward the elevator, I realized something else. The burning bridge illuminated the path forward. I wasn't walking away into the dark anymore. I was walking toward something that was mine. Friday. Friday it would be over. I pressed the elevator button. The arrow lit up, pointing up. I am ready, I whispered to myself. The Friday meeting felt less like a legal proceeding and more like a coronation. Though the crown being offered was heavy and made of thorns, the conference room at Sovereign Trust was crowded. The air conditioner hummed with a low, aggressive drone, fighting the midday heat that radiated off the glass building. I sat at the head of the table this time. It wasn't a seat I had asked for, but Mr. Vance had gestured to it when I walked in, and I had taken it without asking for permission. To my right sat Sarah Jenkins and David Rosen, my architects of truth. To my left sat the opposition, Lucas, looking hollowed out and unshaven, Miss Sterling, who was aggressively checking her watch, and their lawyer, Mr. Moretti, who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. My mother sat at the far end of the table. She looked small. For the first time in my life, she didn't look like the matriarch of the Price dynasty. She looked like an elderly woman who was realizing that the world had moved on without her permission. There was a new face in the room as well. A man named Arthur Graham sat quietly near Mr. Vance. He wore a gray suit and had the calm, observant demeanor of a man who specialized in fixing broken things. Mr. Vance stood up. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. We are here to execute the final distribution and restructuring of the Robert J. Price estate and the associated trust. Mr. Vance announced, all parties are present. The audit has been concluded. The terms have been set. He placed a heavy stack of documents in the center of the table. First, we will address the heir designation and the structure of the distribution. He opened the blue binder that had become the Bible of my last 2 weeks. Kennedy Price is confirmed as the primary eligible beneficiary. Vance read, however, the grantor was specific about the mechanics of this transfer. He did not want the beneficiary to be burdened or pressured by a sudden influx of liquid capital. He looked at Lucas as he said the word pressured. Therefore, the trust is structured as a discretionary lifetime trust. Kennedy will not receive a lump sum. Instead, she will receive quarterly distributions of income generated by the trust's assets. The principal, the ownership stake in Price Miller Manufacturing, will remain held by the trust. I felt a wave of relief. Dad had thought of everything. If I had been given millions in cash today, Lucas and Mom would have spent the next 10 years guilt-tripping me into giving it to them. We need a new roof. The car broke down. We are family. By locking the capital away. Dad had given me the ultimate excuse. I couldn't give them the money even if I wanted to. Mr. Vance turned the page. Furthermore, regarding the care of Deborah Price, Mom sat up straighter. I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. She was expecting a payout. She was expecting to be handed control. The grantor was aware that his wife had limited experience with financial management. Mr. Vance said, his voice neutral. And he wished to prevent a situation where his daughter, Kennedy, would be forced into the role of financial caretaker for her mother. He pulled out a separate, thinner file. Therefore, Robert Price established a separate corollary fund, the Deborah Price Care Trust. It is funded with a portion of his life insurance proceeds. It is not managed by the family. It is managed by a third-party institutional trustee. Specifically, Mr. Graham here. Mr. Graham nodded politely to my mother. Mrs. Price, the fund will pay your bills directly. Utilities, medical expenses, groceries. You will receive a modest monthly stipend for personal use, but you will never have to ask your daughter for money, and she will never have the power to give it to you or withhold it from you. The relationship is severed financially. Mom stared at him. Her mouth opened and closed. I don't need a babysitter, she stammered. I am his wife. I should control the money. You have a history of deferring financial decisions to your husband, and recently, to your son. Mr. Vance said, and given your son's recent performance with the company finances. The grantor's foresight appears to be validated. It was a brilliant surgical strike. Dad had known that if Mom depended on me for money, she would resent me even more. She would hate me for holding the purse strings, by outsourcing her care to a stranger. He had removed the poison from our relationship. We could just be two women who knew each other, without the debt of gratitude or the weight of obligation hanging between us. Lucas cleared his throat. It was a wet, ragged sound. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. His hand was shaking. "Wait," Lucas said. "Before we sign anything, I found something." "Mr." Vance sighed. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Mr. Price, we have been over the documentation." "No," Lucas insisted, his voice rising in pitch. "I found this last night, in Dad's old briefcase, the one in the attic. I must have missed it before." He slid the paper across the table. "It is a letter," Lucas said. "A letter of intent, written 3 months ago. I looked at the paper. It was typed. It looked official. To whom it may concern, I, Robert Price, being of sound mind, hereby express my desire to revoke the 1999 trust structure. I realize that my son, Lucas, has matured into a capable leader. It is my wish that he be granted full control of Price Miller Manufacturing upon my death, and that Kennedy be given a one-time gift of $50,000. I stared at the words. It was exactly what Lucas wanted to be true. It was a fantasy typed out on 20-pound bond paper. Mom looked at the letter, her eyes widening. "See?" she cried. "I told you. He changed his mind. He wouldn't leave Lucas with nothing." Mr. Vance picked up the letter. He didn't read it. He held it up to the light. He felt the texture of the paper. "Mr. Moretti, Mr. Vance said to Lucas's lawyer, "Are you entering this into the record?" Moretti looked at the letter, then at his client. He looked nervous. "I haven't seen this document before." Moretti said, "Lucas, where did you get this?" "I told you," Lucas said, sweating now. "The attic." "Mr. Vance placed the paper down. He looked at David Rosen, the forensic accountant. "Mr. Rosen, if you would." David opened his laptop. He reached across the table and took the paper. He held his phone over it, scanning the text. "It is a nice font," David said. "Times New Roman. Very classic." He typed a few keys on his laptop. "However," David said, his voice flat, "this letter mentions Price Miller Manufacturing, LLC. So?" Lucas asked. "That is the company name." "No," David corrected. "The company was an S-corp until 2 months ago. It only became an LLC after your father died. You filed the paperwork yourself, Lucas. Your father would have called it Price Miller, Inc., or just the company. He wouldn't have used a legal designation that didn't exist yet." Lucas went pale. "Also," David continued, looking at his screen, "the specific phrasing 'matured into a capable leader' matches a phrase you used in your own LinkedIn bio update 3 weeks ago. It is a linguistic fingerprint, Mr." Vance leaned forward. "And finally," Vance said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl, "we anticipated this. We have been monitoring the metadata on the printer in your home office. Lucas, that printer, which is connected to the company network, logged a print job at 2 a.m. today. The file name was dad_letter_final_version_3.docx. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the sound of a coffin lid slamming shut. "This is fraud, Mr. Vance stated. "It is fabrication of evidence. It is an attempt to defraud a trust." Lucas slumped back in his chair. He looked at Mom. She was staring at him with horror. Not because he had lied, I realized, but because he had been caught. She was watching her golden boy turn into lead right before her eyes. "I didn't mean," Lucas whispered. It is what he would have wanted." "Mr. Vance ignored him. He turned to me. "Ms. Price, given this new attempt at fraud, the trust is moving to the enforcement phase immediately." He listed the consequences like a judge reading a sentence. 1. All accounts associated with Lucas Price that contain company funds are frozen as of this morning. 2. The trust is filing a civil confession of judgment against Lucas Price for the $142,000 in diverted funds. His personal assets will be attached until restitution is made. 3. Lucas Price is formally removed from all positions at Price Miller Manufacturing. His security badge has already been deactivated. 4. Ms. Sterling and the S. Group are permanently barred from any interaction with trust assets. We are also filing a complaint with the State Board of Financial Advisors regarding her conduct. Ms. Sterling stood up abruptly. I was merely acting on the instructions of the apparent executor. She said, her voice brittle, I will be resigning my advisory role effective immediately. She walked out of the room without looking at Lucas. The rat was leaving the sinking ship. Mr. Graham, the neutral manager, spoke for the first time. I will be stepping in as interim CEO of Price Miller. Graham said, my job is to stabilize the workforce, audit the supply chain, and ensure the company remains profitable for the trust. I report to the trustee, and the trustee reports to you. Kennedy. He looked at me with respect. Not pity, respect. I nodded. Thank you. Mr. Graham. Now, Mr. Vance said, the floor is yours. Miss Price. I stood up. My legs felt steady. My hands were not shaking. I looked at the people who had defined my reality for 33 years. I looked at Lucas, who was staring at the table, defeated. I looked at Mom, who was weeping softly into a handkerchief. I didn't feel the urge to scream. I didn't feel the need to throw the chair through the window. I just felt a profound, quiet clarity. You spent my entire life telling me I was a guest. I said. My voice was low, but it carried in the silent room. You told me with your words, calling me temporary. You told me with your actions, locking me out of decisions. You told me with your money, hoarding it for the real family. I looked at Mom. You were so afraid that I would take something from you. I continued. You were so afraid that loving me would cost you something, so you treated me like an employee who might steal the silverware. You made me audition for a role I had already been cast in. Mom looked up. Her eyes were wet. Kennedy, she choked out. I tried. You don't know how hard it was. I know exactly how hard it was. Mom, I said, because I was the one doing the work. I was the one trying to be perfect so you wouldn't send me back. I was the one walking on eggshells so Lucas wouldn't get jealous. I spent 30 years begging for a seat at a table that Dad had built for me. I looked at Lucas. And you? I said, you thought that because you shared his DNA, you were entitled to his respect. But you didn't know him. You didn't know the man who wrote in that notebook. You saw a bank account. I saw a father. Lucas didn't answer. He couldn't. I am done begging. I said, I am done auditioning. I am not a guest. I am the host. And as the host, I am setting the house rules. Mom stood up shakily. She walked around the table toward me. She reached out her hands. Kennedy, please, she said, we can start over. Now that everything is out in the open, we can be a real family. You can come home. We can have Sunday dinner. We can put this behind us. It was the apology I had wanted when I was 10. It was the invitation I had craved when I was 20. But now, at 33, it rang hollow. It sounded like a negotiation tactic. She wasn't asking for a daughter. She was asking for amnesty. I stepped back. I didn't let her touch me. No. Mom, I said. She froze. What? You don't get to rewrite the past just because the paperwork caught up with you. I said, you don't get to treat me like a stranger for 3 decades and then call me family the minute I have the checkbook. But where will you go? She asked. The house? It is your home. I looked at the documents on the table. There was one final decision to make. The house, the big, beautiful, cold colonial house where I had slept in the guest room. Mr. Vance, I said, regarding the real estate asset. Yes, Ms. Price? I am placing the family home into the trust. I said. Mom let out a breath of relief. Thank God. But, I continued, I am not living there, and I am not managing it. I looked at Mom. You can live there, Mom. The trust will hold the title. Mr. Graham will handle the maintenance and the taxes. You will have a roof over your head for the rest of your life. Dad wanted you to be safe, but, she asked, sensing the other shoe about to drop, but I will not be visiting. I said, and Lucas is not permitted to live there. Lucas's head snapped up. You are kicking me out? You have your own life to rebuild. Lucas, I said, and you can't do it from your childhood bedroom. I turned back to Mom. I am choosing to protect the asset, I said, but I am also choosing to protect myself. I am walking away. I am going back to the city. I am going to live my life. You are leaving me alone? Mom whispered. You are not alone, I said. You have Mr. Graham. You have your bridge club. You have the memory of the husband you didn't appreciate. But you don't have me as a crutch anymore. I sat back down. Where do I sign? I asked Mr. Vance. Mr. Vance opened the final document, the execution page. He handed me a heavy black pen. Right here. Kennedy. I looked at the signature line. Kennedy Price, primary beneficiary. I signed my name. The ink flowed smoothly, dark and permanent. With each loop of the letters, I felt lighter. I wasn't signing a contract. I was signing an emancipation proclamation. I passed the papers to Mr. Vance. He stamped them. Executed. It is done. Mr. Vance said. He reached into his briefcase one last time. He pulled out a small, sealed envelope. It was identical to the one I had opened at the first meeting, but smaller. Your father left one final instruction. Mr. Vance said. He said this was to be given to you only after the documents were signed, only after you had made the choice to stand your ground. He slid the envelope across the table. I picked it up. My name was on the front. I didn't look at Lucas or Mom. I didn't care about their reactions anymore. I tore open the flap. Inside was a single index card. I read it. Kennedy, if you are reading this, you did it. You stood up to them. I knew you would. I spent years worrying that I needed to save you from them, that I needed to build walls of money to keep you safe. But watching you grow up, I realized I had it backward. I didn't adopt you to save you. Kennedy, I adopted you because I needed someone strong enough to save the truth of who I was. You were the only real thing in my life. I didn't save you. I trusted your strength. Be happy. It is finally yours. Love, Dad. Tears pricked my eyes, but they didn't fall. I smiled, a genuine, warm smile that started in my chest and spread to my face. He hadn't seen me as a victim. He had seen me as a warrior. He had left me this battle because he knew I was the only one who could win it. I stood up. I tucked the note into my pocket, right next to my heart. Thank you, Mr. Vance, I said. I turned to go. Kennedy? Mom called out. Her voice was small, frightened. I stopped at the door. I looked back at the room one last time. The glass walls, the expensive suits, the shattered family. Goodbye, Mom, I said. I walked out. I walked through the lobby, past the security desk, and out into the blinding sunlight of the parking lot. The air smelled of asphalt and summer. It smelled like freedom. I got into my car, my own car, paid for with my own money, and turned the key. The engine roared to life. I didn't look in the rearview mirror as I pulled onto the highway. I didn't need to see the building receding behind me. I knew what was back there. Back there was the past. Ahead of me, the road was wide open, and for the first time in 33 years, I knew exactly where I was going. Thank you for listening to this story. It is a journey that many of us know too well. The struggle to find our place in families that don't always know how to hold us. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? Have you ever had to fight for your own history? Please let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed Kennedy's story of reclaiming her truth, please consider subscribing to Revenge Stories. We have many more tales of justice, dignity, and the long road to redemption coming your way. Share your thoughts in English. I read every single one. Until next time, remember, you don't need permission to exist.